Welcome to the Independent Advisors Podcast, where we dive into the world of stocks, tradable markets, and financial planning with Jessup Wealth Management's Chief Investment Officer, Mark McEvily, and CEO, Matt Jessup. You'll hear tips, tricks, and strategies to address your financial well-being, and most importantly, conveyed in a way that everyone can understand. Here are your hosts, Mark and Matt.
Welcome to episode number 156 of the Independent Advisors Podcast, where Mark McEvily and I, Matt Jessup, bring you everything you need to know from the past week in the world of the financial markets and financial planning. This week, I'll be hosting the podcast solo as we have a special guest with us, Jennifer Almoney. Jennifer Almoney founded Almoney Educational Consulting to help students identify and expand their knowledge of colleges that are a good fit and make smart, educated choices to reach their full potential. Jennifer, thank you for joining me this week.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
It's going to be a great episode. And this will be one that people reference as time goes on, as they have kids and grandkids.
That's right.
Heading into college. It'll be a great one. Before I begin, I'm going to take about 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to discuss pricing, headlines of the week, a couple pieces of research that caught my eye, and then I'm just going to give my own update, Jennifer, on kind of what I'm seeing in the markets. I know some of the viewers want to hear that, and then we'll turn it over to our interview of you.
That sounds great.
So actually, I'm going to dig right into headlines and current events to save a little time. So starting off with the headlines of last week, what was very interesting is last week was a very good week for the stock market. Last week kind of turned a coin where it turned out that bad news was actually good for the economy. So there were signs that inflation might be moderating as growth cooled, and it helped stocks rally sharply over the holiday-shortened week, lifting the S&P out of bear market territory. Nearly every sector in the index last week recorded strong gains outside of energy. Now, I'll be talking a little bit, listeners and viewers, about what's been happening this week and kind of my updated outlook here in a little bit, as I mentioned earlier. Headline number 2 that caught my eye. Data is indicating that consumers are stabilizing their inflation expectations as confidence in their finances reached new lows. The University of Michigan's final reading of June consumer sentiment was revised down to 50 last week, its lowest level in records dating back over the last 4 decades. The report also showed that consumers expect inflation to rise at an annualized rate of 5.3% for the second month in a row, below forecast and the peak rate of 5.4% recorded in March and April. Consumers' 5-year inflation expectations rose slightly to 3.1%, and that was somewhat below consensus expectations. Since August, expectations have remained within a range of about 3%. So definitely concerning on the consumer sentiment side, and that would lead me to believe that we're going to have a technical recession being reported at the end of July, which I'll talk about in a second. Third and final headline that caught my eye, which I find important, is the Federal Reserve Board on Thursday projected the potential for a rockier road ahead for banks than it did a year ago, and said that the 33 financial institutions that it considered systematically important to the financial system have all passed their annual stress test of capital reserves. The Fed estimated that $612 billion in potential losses for banks in its most severe economic scenario, and said even if this comes to pass, banks would still be healthy enough to provide loans to homes and businesses to keep the economy afloat. That's a $50 billion more severe loss projection than a year ago. And one thing I found really interesting is the Fed's model for this included a increase in unemployment to 10%, a 40% decline in commercial real estate prices, and a 55% drop in stock prices. So a pretty severe stress test by the Federal Reserve, and all of the largest 33 banks passed, which was interesting. Next, I'm going to transition to articles and research that caught my eye this week. This first one that I saw, Jennifer, was really, really interesting to me. It shows a chart looking back in history to the worst beginnings of the stock market in the first roughly 116 trading days of the year from when this was published about a week ago. And the amazing part is we have the second worst start for the stock market going back in history for the S&P. And the thing that caught my eye about this chart that I wanted to share with our listeners and viewers is what tends to happen the rest of that year. And statistically speaking, the rest of the year tends to be very, very good for the markets. And so, for example, in 1932, the market was down 40% in the first 116 trading days. In the final part of the year, it rallied 43%. In 62, it started down 21, rallied 13 to end the year. So I know Jenna's going to put this chart up on our show notes as well as for our viewers on YouTube. So you can see this right now as I speak. Again, things seem pretty bad right now, but when you kind of look at history, things tend to kind of turn up in the second half of the year. Though I think the year, to me, Jenna, that looked the most similar was 1970 on this one. So 1970, we were down similar year to date, similar inflationary environment. So I found that one, in my opinion, having more of a correlation. Next piece that caught my eye is retail investors seem to be throwing in the towel. We're getting some data, and Jenna will also put this chart up for our viewers on YouTube, that we're seeing signs of what I would call capitulation from retail investors. The source on this data, on this one specifically, is JP Morgan, and it shows the weekly inflows or outflows of money by retail investors. In this past week, we saw the heaviest week of retail selling since September of 2020. Why do I think this is a good thing specifically? Ultimately, in my opinion, you're going to need to see capitulation for the market to find a true bottom. And this is a good segue, Jenna, for me to kind of talk about my commentary on the markets. So before we start interviewing Jennifer, my 2 cents is there's a good chance that things over the short term could definitely get worse before they get better. But I definitely think we're kind of near the end of a lot of the selling pressure that you're seeing right now in the markets. And I think you could see an ultimate bottom, in my opinion, late summer, early fall. So again, we're kind of almost through. I think the market is pricing in a lot of this risk that everyone's talking about. So now I'm going to transition to our guest, Jennifer Almoney. Jennifer has over 25 years of experience as an educator and a consultant. She received her bachelor's in education from Vanderbilt University and began her teaching career in the Upper Arlington City Schools in Columbus, while also receiving her master's in education from The Ohio State University. She then moved to Dayton and taught in the Oakwood City Schools as both a classroom teacher and a consultant for the Oakwood Schools, training teachers on how to teach reading to young children. Jennifer also received her certificate in independent educational consulting from the University of California, Irvine, and immediately began her college consulting business in 2020. She's a member of several national professional organizations, including Independent Educational Consultants Association, Higher Education Consultants Association, and the Ohio Association of College Admissions Counseling. Jennifer, welcome.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
You have an impressive background.
Thank you.
So before I start the interview, I would like to explain why I wanted to have you on the podcast. You know, pretty simply put, the college selection and application process is very overwhelming for a lot of families. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. Mm-hmm. I also think that there's a lot of misunderstood aspects. And I'm hoping with your visit today to Jessup Wealth Management, we can gain some clarity on these topics.
I think you're right, and thanks for having me.
This is going to be great. So let's dig in. Can you begin by describing your day-to-day as an educational consultant? What do you do day-to-day?
Sure. So I really work with families. Often my clients are freshmen in high school or sophomores. I begin with them early.
Yes.
And I work with families on an individual basis in all aspects of their high school education, as well as all the way through their college applications.
Okay.
So we are doing things like charting the best courses to take throughout high school based on end result and what we want, what that student wants to do later in life. What are the best high school courses to take? We're looking at summer opportunities, extracurricular activities, all kinds of things where kids can get involved and maybe experience something that they would help them gain a larger understanding about something they want to study later.
Yep.
all the way through working on the college applications, starting with a great college list, and the last essay, we work through that.
There's so many moving parts to what you do.
That's
Right? And I think the thing that I'm excited about this interview as we go through it, I know you're going to break down some of these parts and these different kind of timelines and the evolution of someone's child or grandchild. It's still at times, it's overwhelming.
Absolutely. And there are things that I do with families, like, for instance, which specifically why we sort of came together on this was the financial aspect of college. Sure. People can often look at sticker shock in a college, private institution in particular, and say, how in the world could we spend $300,000 per child on their education? So
and the parents still retire when they want to.
Absolutely. And so I help families compare costs, compare location of the schools, compare curriculums, and I help them weed through all of those aspects. And financially, which we can talk about in a little bit as well, what are the best decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it from the aspect of someone could spend, the money that they spend on a consultant like you, they could get a dramatic return on that with the decisions that you assist them in making. So this is a slam dunk for me.
Absolutely. And not only do they often get a return in their investment, but they get a little bit of their day-to-day stress relieved, because it is an overwhelming process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what are some of the current trends you're seeing right now in college admissions? Let's start there.
Well, I think one of the most confusing parts that COVID has, the result of the last few years, really is in college admissions, and it's very confusing for families. Test optional, we hear this all the time. Does my child need to take the ACT or the SAT? Mm-hmm. If these schools are test optional, what does that mean? Well, it means you still need to take the test if you can take the test. And as confusing as that is, if you can test, you need to test. And if you can take the test again and improve your score, that's a great thing. These schools are saying test optional, but data is showing us that kids with strong test scores are faring better in the application process. So I can help students look at their list. We can look at their test scores and say, okay, we're sending test scores to this school. We're not sending test scores to this school.
Makes sense.
And we wade through all that. So that's a huge trend, and one that's, I find, most confusing for families.
Well, where that really comes into play is it's an art, not a science. And they really need a consultant like you to help them look at that landscape. You know that landscape, and you can sit there and say, hey, here's your wish list of schools. Here's how we need to approach them differently.
Well, absolutely. And another trend that I think plays into that is that applications are massively on the rise. Colleges are businesses.
Yes.
They exist as a business.
Yes.
So they love the fact that their applications are up 45%.
That's right.
And that means that they can admit fewer people.
Absolutely.
And that means that their admit rate goes down.
Yes.
And that makes them more prestigious. Yes. That's what people feel or people think.
The acceptance rate,
Our acceptance rate's 9%. So we're a more prestigious school, which at the end, that doesn't equate to prestige.
That's right.
And so with applications on the rise, I think I put on my Instagram this week, this is an astounding fact. Tulane University.
Yes.
Has 1,800 kids per class.
Okay.
That's what their class size is. They accepted 106 of those students in regular decision.
That's it?
All other students were accepted during the early decision round. So if you didn't apply early decision, your chance of getting into Tulane this past year was around 1%.
Oh my gosh.
It didn't make sense, and that's what these schools are doing. They're trying to lock in their class early.
And see, this is the type of knowledge why someone needs you.
Yeah,
because people don't know this.
It's stunning. And so those applications on the rise it's another huge trend. And so you've got to really be careful with where you apply, how many schools you apply to.
Okay.
State flagship schools like Ohio State, the Ohio State.
Yes.
State flagship applications are on the rise. It's a trickle-down effect. So let's say you've got a student that's applying to 10 or 12 schools, but maybe they don't have a very balanced list, and maybe they're only applying to those top 20 U.S. News and World Report schools.
Yes.
And let's say they don't get into any of those schools.
Yes.
What's going to happen? They're going to get into Ohio State. And so the trickle down is better test scores, better grades. These are the students getting into the state flagships.
Yes.
So what happens? These other students aren't getting in.
Oh my
and
gosh.
so it's a trickle down. So that's why you have to be super careful with the list of schools where your student applies.
Wow.
So you've got to keep having that conservative mix of schools. And that's a really important part. So I would say those are the biggest trends that we must take into account as we're looking at applications.
Yeah, and as I was kind of thinking about, our interview, one of the questions that I know is probably on a lot of people's minds, and you can answer this later if you think it's more appropriate. My mom or dad went to XYZ school, so it should be a slam dunk that I end up getting into XYZ school, and I think that landscape has changed.
Absolutely. It's called a legacy.
Okay.
And legacies certainly used to play a larger role in college admissions.
Yes.
And these schools are coming out now saying, no,
It doesn't
we can't
hold
do
as
that. We
much
have
of a-
too many alumni. We can't just guarantee only legacies
Yes.
for our admission. And so it really doesn't hold the weight it used to hold.
Okay. Well, next question I've prepared. Can you tell us the different types of financial aid
Sure.
in the college admissions process? This is for parents and grandparents who don't deal with this stuff every day, this is very overwhelming.
It's very overwhelming. And so what we have to do is realize that there are two pots of money.
Okay.
The first is need-based aid.
Need-based aid.
That's federal money. Families that you fill out what's called the FAFSA.
Yes.
In the fall of your child's senior year.
Yes.
And that is going to let you know if you qualify. And I can tell you right now that if your family has a total income or assets that are greater than somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000, you will not qualify for need-based aid.
And with today's society, with a lot of dual incomes, no one's going to qualify. I mean, most won't.
Well, there are plenty that do qualify.
Yes.
But it is certainly a factor. And so that comes from the federal government, and that is in the form of grants that you don't have to pay back.
Okay.
It could be in the form of loans.
Okay.
And that's called need-based aid.
Okay.
So if you're in an income bracket that's higher than $100,000 in your household,
Yes.
you're then looking at what we call merit aid.
Okay.
Okay, merit aid is an academic award. So many schools have charts right on their websites that say if your child has this GPA and this test score, then you're going to get an $11,000 discount to our school. This would be your cost to go to our school.
Interesting. And they put that stuff right on their websites.
Some do.
Okay.
Some do.
All right.
Others are not as transparent, but that takes into account your GPA, your test scores often if you've sent them.
Okay.
So that's merit aid. Most private colleges, you can never look at the sticker cost of a private college and think that's what you're going to pay.
That's a very big point right there.
You often get merit aid, depending on your bracket of income.
So
but
do you think it's a situation, Jennifer, where parents see those headline sticker costs and immediately throw it out the door because they think, my family, we cannot afford that?
Oh, absolutely. And they don't realize there is a huge list of around 140 colleges in the United States that offer amazing merit aid right here in our own town. University of Dayton is amazing merit aid.
That's phenomenal.
Butler in Indianapolis, College of Worcester, that's another school in Ohio.
All great colleges.
Center in Kentucky. These schools are private schools that offer amazing merit aid. So that's a really important fact. In addition to the merit aid, the best place, or a couple places that are the best to look for scholarships.
Yeah.
The first is the institution themselves. So schools where you're applying have institutional scholarships.
Okay.
And you have a much greater chance of getting those scholarships than you would a national scholarship where 25,000 students are applying to. The next place are local foundations. I know here in Dayton, we have a Dayton Foundation.
Correct.
If you live in Oakwood, there's an Oakwood Schools Foundation.
Yes.
All of those foundations actually have scholarships that they offer.
Excellent point.
So those are great places to look. So those pots of money are there. In addition, you can send letters once you've received an acceptance, and if you've received a financial award, your let's see, the FAFSA this year, we're in 2022, will be the 2020 tax returns, I believe.
Yes.
If you've had, let's say in 2021, you've had a large change in your income. You've got to fill out the FAFSA based on your 2020.
No matter what.
No matter what.
Yep.
But you can then petition to the financial aid divisions
Yes.
of these schools to get a greater award and for them to reevaluate based on new information.
This is why the cost of someone like you is, in my opinion, extremely well worth all of this knowledge that you have.
Right. And how to write those letters, and what do you do, and who do you write them to, and who writes the letters.
In advising the parents and the students,
right?
This is where you kind of apply for aid and scholarships.
Right. So all families have different needs, right? And different students. Some students come and say, listen, I need the most merit aid in undergraduate. I want to go to med school. And my parents can't pay for all of those years of schooling,
and
right?
And you'll help navigate that road
right.
towards that path.
So it's often better to go to a school where you can get the most merit aid in your undergraduate, knowing that you don't want to come out of med school with $500,000 in debt.
Yeah. No, this interview is going to be gold for us. And I love all your knowledge in this. So what do you think parents should know about what's important in high school for the college admission process? Let's go there next.
Well, the first thing is that you never want to push a student to do things just for a resume. One of the most important things that I think I can bring is, no, let's take the student where they are.
Yes.
And let's add to those experiences that they're interested in.
I would agree. I mean, as an outsider, I don't have kids that are in high school yet, Jennifer. And obviously, if they have a passion for something, have them go that way.
Right. And it's not about the amount of extracurriculars, the sheer volume. It's about the quality. It's quality over quantity.
That's a great insight.
And so looking at extracurriculars, certainly kids need to be involved. Maybe their passion is theater. Maybe their passion is music. Maybe they're really into sports. And those things are great. Keep kids involved in an in-depth way to those activities. But then you want to look outside of your high school. You want to look into your community. You want to see, okay, are there volunteering opportunities in areas that I'm interested in?
Yeah.
Maybe I'm interested in being a financial planner one day.
That's right.
So what does that look like? Are there opportunities for me to gain knowledge and insight into that area?
Yes.
So that I can show, no, I really am interested in being a financial planner, and this is why. I've investigated it. I've spent time on it.
Yep.
So those are areas that I can help with that. So extracurriculars obviously is a huge important part. Grades are obviously important, but my clients, I have clients with a 2.5 all the way up to your high flyers, because
That's
everyone needs
too.
help.
That's
Everyone
an
needs
important
help.
point too.
There is a college for everyone.
Absolutely. And going back to your comment about, people, showing their passion, and use the example of financial planning. I had an intern a couple years ago, and he was going between high school to college that summer. He interned here. And I think the perception is you can only intern when you're, a junior or senior in college. Not true.
It's not true, because
not true.
there are all kinds of experiences students can have. And I have students, that want to go into nursing. And so what are those experiences? Myself, we have 4 kids.
Yeah.
And they they range in what they interests and what they want to do. They're all 4 very different. So that's important, to really deepen their interests in areas that are meaningful to them.
And that is extremely important.
So then obviously grades. So like I said, I have kids with a 2.5 all the way up to a 4.5. So you have to take kids where they are.
Yep.
And colleges will look at their transcripts. So what types of classes do they take? Do they take honors classes? Do they take AP classes? Are they just in your regular classes? And all of those areas, are important for parents to know. One of the tips that I like to say about classes that I don't think parents realize: one of the most important classes that you need to take minimally 3 years of is a foreign language.
Interesting.
Colleges want well-rounded students.
Minimum 3.
There are schools, California schools in particular, they don't even want to look at your application if you haven't had 3 years.
Interesting.
And so you need to keep that foreign language up. You need to minimally get to a Spanish 3 or a French 3, but better yet, get to Spanish 4 or French 4 or sign language. You can take American Sign Language. There are kids taking Latin still. Some schools still offer Latin. Whatever your foreign language is, stick with it.
So this brings an important question I want to throw out there. In your optimal world, when would you start interacting with a family for the parents and the student? If it were in your perfect world, when would that be?
The best time for me to start with the family is a freshman year of a student, because you need to make sure that their class choices reflect their goals later.
Yes.
Even if the student doesn't know their goals and they're 13 years old and they have no clue.
Yes.
The parents often have ideas and thoughts about the types of schools. So we need to get that path going. Math is a really important path. What does that look like? Where are they starting with their math and their foreign language? Those are 2 of the most important areas that you need to view. It's kind of important for kids to get to calculus.
Okay.
By senior year. So you've got to figure out how to
get there. The other thing I wanted to kind of make a point about when you were speaking was in regards to the GPA range. And as, an outsider to what you do day to day, I'm glad you brought that up, because I fear a perception could be people only require consultants like yourself if their students are 4.0 plus, right? And they're in the ultra competitive situation that they want to get into their wish list of colleges. Is that obviously part of what you do? Obviously so. But for, parents and students that don't have that 4.0, you still add such a tremendous amount of value. So I just want to kind of just,
that's
as an outsider, I want to throw that point out there.
Everyone can go to college.
Yes.
What are the colleges and where are the colleges that are best for each student?
That's right.
I actually have clients all over the United States. So I have clients in Colorado, in North Carolina, in Illinois, and certainly plenty of clients in Ohio, but I see students across the whole United States.
Yes.
This job is a wonder in virtual. Zoom is a wonderful thing.
Absolutely.
And so you can service kids and families all over the United States. So knowing that and looking at kids from everywhere, that GPA, it's sort of like you're dealing with what comes to you. So may have a 2.5. That's okay. Where are the schools, and how can you present an application of a student that has a 2.5?
Yeah.
What is that? What does their story look like?
I love it. I love it. This is why I think parents and grandparents need to definitely hear this podcast. So I got a couple more questions.
Yeah.
So let's kind of switch gears. Do you have some parent tips for heading into the fall of a senior year? This is an important one, I think.
Absolutely. So I can't stress enough to use summer. I basically work with 20. I limit my client base to 20 kids per graduating class.
Per graduating class.
Per graduating class.
Got it.
So over the years. So my
Yes.
class of 2023 has 20 kids.
Okay.
And although I have great relationships with them, I think they, at this point where I've got due dates for common application and writing their personal statement, and it's like, wait, this is summer. That's exactly right. And I can't tell you the kids that get to school when it starts in the fall, and they're talking to kids who have not done a single thing for an application, and my kids' applications are done.
Love it.
And so the using of the summer is huge. It is a misnomer to think you have lots of time. Most schools, you really need to apply no later than November 1st, oftentimes.
Yes.
Well, that comes up very, very quickly.
And you talked about the early application process and how some schools like Tulane are going to be completely full if they wait too long.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you've got schools that are rolling admissions, which means they admit on a rolling basis. So the earlier you apply to those schools, the better.
Yep.
You've got schools that don't release their, you might be applying to early action, so maybe you can hear in January instead of March. So you have to weigh all of that. So using the summer is really important. And then two other tips that I have. One is have a weekly meeting with your senior.
All right, this is a good one.
So my husband and I actually have a senior coming up. I have a class of 2023.
All right.
Kids do not want to hear every single day, have you worked on your essay? What have you done? Are you doing this? So we set aside about an hour on a Sunday night to say, okay, what are our deadlines this week? What college visits are we going on? When are we going? What does this look like? So then you don't have to nag them all week. You kind of get on the same page.
Love this idea.
So that's a great tip. And then last, you truly cannot let up your senior year. You know, I hate to always be the bearer of bad news with my students who say, listen, I've taken the 3 years minimum of social studies that the state of Ohio requires. Why do I need to take social studies my senior year? And I always say, I'm so sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but you are going to have 4 years across all of your curricular areas.
You know, that's just part of life lessons, Jennifer. I love it.
It is.
I love
it. They know it, and they always say, okay.
I love this. This is a great interview.
Yeah.
Well, here's another one. And this, why should parents not put all their trust in the U.S. News college rankings? This is a hot topic, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this.
It is a hot topic. We could have an entire podcast on the U.S. News rankings.
Oh, I bet.
And how they approach that. I will say, I can tell you another podcast that has two series. If you ever have listened to Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell.
No, I'm going to check it out.
It's a really interesting podcast on a range of topics.
Yeah.
But in season 6, maybe, I think in Revisionist History does a 2-part series on the U.S. News rankings.
Interesting.
And they try to game the system, of which you can.
To get your numbers up.
Absolutely. So I'd like to say you could listen to both of those episodes, which are each an hour long, just on this topic. So that's the first thing. It's very complicated. The biggest thing with U.S. News is that there are several reasons as to why you shouldn't put all your trust in them.
Yes.
Do they have some validity? I mean, are the schools excellent schools that they're listing? Of course they are. But the problem is it's what they're not listing. The schools they're not listing that are amazing schools.
There it is right there.
So their emphasis is on academic rigor. It's on input, not output. They really don't measure how happy a student is at a school and the student experience,
Which is a dramatic.
which is huge to the success of a student. There was a study by Stanford in 2018 that looked at the success of students after college. Was it the name of your college institution that made you successful after college? In every single case but one, and I'll give you that caveat in a minute, that was not the factor. It did not matter the name of your college institution, and it did not show your success. What mattered was how involved was the student within the institution where they attended.
There it is.
Did they do research? Were they involved with clubs? Did they interact with professors? Those were the things that could indicate success after college. The caveat that I will give you is in one scenario,
Yes.
the name of the college did matter.
Okay.
It was first generation, which means a student who has not had parents to attend or finish college. So that's a first generation student.
Okay.
If they're the first in their family to be attending college,
Yep.
and low income at the same time. So first generation low income did benefit from a bump in, say, going to an Ivy or going to a Hopkins or going.
Interesting.
That did bump. But the rest of the Stanford study shows that it's the student experience over the name of the institution. Well, that's not what the U.S. News and World Report rankings can show.
That's right.
So you've got to keep that in mind. The other thing is, obviously, prestige is weighed upon very heavily on those rankings. You may not know this, but college presidents vote. One of the factors in those rankings is the vote of a college president. They're voting for who are the top 5 schools in biomedical engineering.
Interesting.
Well, what if that president has served, they're in their 3rd or 4th school? They'll vote
for the
these
prior
other
ones that
Sure.
they were a part of?
Absolutely. So you have to
In my
keep that in
industry,
mind.
we call it talking your book. When everyone goes on TV, they're obviously talking how they're positioned.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And so that's a huge factor. Private schools always rank higher than public because they can have a smaller class size. They are more selective. So they're going to rank higher because all of those, we call it yield, Tulane, they let in essence, 1,700 out of 1,800 kids. So that means their yield, the amount of students accepting their spots,
It's very high.
is huge. Well, that's a percentage that goes
Yeah, it's
into
like
that.
you get a yes, you're going to go there. Pretty
Sure.
much.
And so the data's flawed. And do some schools put faulty data in? Yeah, they do.
Interesting.
So you cannot, if I had a $1 for every student that came to me and I said, name 10 schools that you know about or you're interested in, 9 of the 10 will be top 25 schools from the U.S. News and World Rankings because that's all they've ever heard. 1 may be a state flagship.
Yeah.
Depending on your state.
Yeah.
They may say Ohio State, or they may
Michigan,
say
Penn
Boulder,
State.
Colorado, or wherever they're located. But
Yeah.
9 out of 10 are ranking schools. So my goal is to introduce them to new colleges, new curriculum areas, all of those.
And I'm sure
those
the
things.
eye-opening experience comes if they ever visit some of those not in that top 25.
Right. I have a student that graduated this past year that's headed to University of Missouri, going to Mizzou. And the mom said, do you know, we would have never known. We would have never looked at Mizzou. And it was the perfect fit for their son.
That's awesome.
But
That's
they
in
wouldn't
Cape
have known.
Girardeau, isn't it?
Columbia,
Columbia.
Missouri.
Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I know we talked a lot about, what you do, the services that you provide clients. I think it'd be smart. Let's just do a recap. And I could probably do the recap for you, but I would not do you justice. So why would someone use an independent educational consultant? Will you just recap for our viewers and listeners?
Yeah, I offer a value in terms of offering There are independent consultants that work in groups. They bring kids in groups. I do not. I work individually with families, so it's very personalized process.
Okay.
I have a student right now that has to have Ultimate Frisbee.
That has to be on the list.
It has to be on the list, so I
That's
can help
awesome,
with that
though.
process.
That is awesome, though. That's a passion.
It is a passion. I will tell you, I think my biggest value is that I am a middleman. It is stressful to go through this process. I certainly offer a peacekeeping opportunity between parents and students. There are many, many times that parents may be saying what I'm saying, but the student does not want to hear it until I say it.
Well, you're an amazing mother yourself, and it's just great that you can kind of bridge that gap. I could see how that within itself is worth what you charge.
It is stressful. And so I keep that stress as low as we can. But that middleman, parents can feed me information and say, listen, Johnny is really not wanting to visit these schools. And they know as soon as they come to me, what am I going to say? Listen, Johnny, you have to visit. This is a part of the process. And they say, okay.
Yeah.
And they don't argue with me. They might behind their backs. They may say to their parents, oh. But I think that's one of the biggest values. And the second of the largest is keeping things in manageable chunks.
There it is.
Not getting ahead of yourself.
Yep.
So I work very, for instance, with my rising juniors. That's class of 2024 right now. We're doing all their personality and strength testing. We're looking at their career interests. What do they want to major in? And we're building that college list.
Yes.
Whereas my class of 2023, we're doing parts of the common application. So it's a manageable chunks. Don't get ahead of yourself, and that will keep the stress down. But the goal is moving into that fall of senior year in a really good position, and it will alleviate so much stress within the family unit and within the students themselves. So I think those are the biggest values. And of course, as you've heard today, I can keep up with the trends and who is test optional, who is not test optional, who's test blind, who is not, where do I, what do I do, and what is this part of the application? So those are the greatest values I think that I offer families.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I'd like to do. I want to share your website, and I'm going to start by saying you can get more information on Jennifer Almoney's services on her website, which is almoneyeducationalconsulting.com.
That's right.
In addition, for our firm and our client base, we're going to be holding an event here coming up in September.
Yeah.
I'm going to be promoting that on the podcast coming up in July and August a couple different times. If people have an interest, they can reach out to Jenna at our firm. She's our director of marketing, and they can get them on the list if they wish to attend that event, which I'm very excited about. So as we wrap up, Jennifer, I know your time is extremely valuable. I love what you do now, your passion, and the families and the students that you impact the rest of their lives. I can't thank you enough for sharing your feedback and your knowledge today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Matt, for having me. I'm looking forward to September.
You're a rock star. So listeners and viewers, thank you for being a part of episode 156 of the Independent Advisors Podcast. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And Mark and I will be back next week on Thursday for episode 157.
Thank you for listening to the Independent Advisors Podcast. If you're interested in hearing more, hit the subscribe button so you can be notified every time a new episode gets released. Feel free to share with friends, family, and follow us on Twitter at Jessup Wealth, Facebook, and LinkedIn. Mark and Matt will continue to share beneficial information on these social media sites. Also, check out the podcast tab on their website. That's www.jessupwealthmanagement.com. There you'll find links to every episode of the Independent Advisors. Have questions or topics you want to discuss on the show? Message us on Twitter, LinkedIn, or send an email with the words questions and topics in the subject line to inquiries@jessupwealthmanagement.com. We'll talk about it right here on the podcast. Certain sections of this commentary may contain forward-looking statements based on reasonable expectations, estimates, projections, and assumptions. Forward-looking statements are not guarantees of future performance and involve certain risks and uncertainties which are difficult to predict. All indices are unmanaged and are not available for direct investment by the public. Past performance is not indicative of future results. This podcast is provided for general informational purposes only and does not constitute either tax, legal, or financial advice. Although we do go to great lengths to make sure our information is accurate and useful, we recommend you consult a tax preparer, professional tax advisor, financial advisor, or lawyer regarding your specific circumstances. Investing involves risk, including the loss of principal. No strategy can guarantee any objective or goal will be achieved. Advisory services offered through Commonwealth Financial Network, a registered investment advisor.